today to be able to present this to you. I used to work for a school district for 20 years, and then the Lord called me to come to Urban Impact, and so it's really been a blessing. And one of the things that I found working on the north side for the last 12 years and in Pittsburgh Public Schools for 20 is that we deal with a lot of kids who are in poverty. And so about 3 years ago, I read this book by Eric Jensen. It was called Teaching with Poverty in Mind. And it really changed the way that I looked at students. So I want to start with a working definition of poverty so we're all on the same page about what poverty is and the types of poverty that are most prevalent here on the north side. So poverty is a chronic and debilitating condition that results from multiple adverse synergistic risk factors and affects the mind, body, and soul. So that's Jensen's definition of poverty that he uses as a framework for the book. And he defines 6 types of poverty, but for our purposes, we're going to focus on 3. And so the first is situational poverty, and so that's poverty that's caused by a sudden crisis. So if someone loses a spouse who was a primary breadwinner and a mom has to go back to work and she's suddenly thrust into poverty, or you have a child with a chronic illness that is mounting up hospital bills and such, that can also cause a family to go into poverty. Then you have generational poverty, occurs in families where 2 or more generations have been born into poverty. This is something that we see is particularly prevalent in public housing communities, where you see families who have lived in the projects for 2, 3 generations. Those children tend to be stuck in a cycle of poverty and very difficult to get out because they don't know, they haven't seen people who aren't living in poverty, and so it's hard to visualize yourself outside of poverty. Urban poverty occurs in metropolitan areas where people deal with a complex aggregate of acute and chronic stressors, and so that basically just talks about Pittsburgh in general. You know, in Pittsburgh we have a very a great disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and I always say living in Pittsburgh is great if you have resources, right? You can enjoy the Pirates, the Steelers, the Pens. You can do all kinds of things in Pittsburgh. You can go to museums, we have great hospitals, but only if you have the resources to enjoy those things. And one of the things that we say with our kids, we like to go for walks on the North Shore, right? But there are lots of families whose parents have to work on Saturdays and Sundays and all 2 jobs and 3 jobs, and so they can't just go for a leisurely stroll on the North Shore and enjoy the beauty of our city. And so that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about urban poverty. Please feel free to stop me at any time with questions. One of the things that I think Rachel spoke to before when we opened up this morning was how we don't know what our kids go through, that they don't all live in safe environments, they don't all live in calm environments, and so they bring a cadre of experiences to school and things that we don't know about. And so I just want to ask a few questions just to frame it. How many of you grew up with 2 parents in your household? So most of you. How many of you had parents who read to you in the mornings or during? In some, yeah, when you were a young child. And the third question is, how many of you moved more than 3 times when you were a child? Okay, and so these are things that our kids are faced with. Some of our students move 2 and 3 times in one school year. And so those kind of things cause a different level of stress than many of us have ever experienced in my life, in our lives. Like, I came from a single parent family. My father died when I was 5. And so even though I had that very tragic situation as a child, I had enough of an extended family where my grandparents and everybody kind of wrapped around my mom, even my neighbors, to help fill that void that was left by my father's passing. So I just want you all to watch this brief video. It's about a teacher in Denver who gave her students the assignment, I wish my teacher knew. And she just kind of gave them a Post-it note and asked them to write down what she thinks, what they wish she knew. And it had really astounding results and kind of caught fire through the country.
Third grade teacher Kyle Schwartz is used to telling her students about the world, But she wanted to know about the world they live in, where 93% of the students qualify for meal assistance.
It's just this simple, powerful way to help kids advocate for themselves.
She created a simple assignment where she wrote, "I wish my teacher knew that," and they filled in the answer. Some of the answers were, "My reading log is not signed because my mom is not around a lot. I miss my dad because he got deported to Mexico when I was 3 years old. I haven't seen him in 6 years. I don't have pencils at home to do my homework."
So I can give them pencils.
Once you know.
Once I know.
Kyla Linkevich wanted to explain why she sometimes comes to school tired.
But I wanted her to know so I don't get much sleep at night because my baby sister, she cries a lot.
A great idea caught on. Last month, Schwartz posted some of the students' work on Twitter. Teachers in at least 17 states have used the assignment. A student in Winchester, Virginia wrote, "I got bullied on the bus. It made me feel sad." Some were typical kid gripes. "My homework is not as easy on Mondays." But the biggest change was in her own classroom.
When there was a note that said, "I wish my teacher knew I don't have a friend to play with," that next day at recess, all the girls huddled around her and they were all playing together because kids support each other.
I asked one third grader, "Why not just talk to your teacher about your thoughts or needs?" He said it was a lot easier writing it down as a class assignment. As we all know, Scott, sometimes it's a little tougher to say things out loud.
One great idea. Barry, thank you very much.
What are some things that you guys have heard from students that you were surprised about or that you didn't know that they were dealing with as you worked with students?
One little girl shared with me that her father was in prison and she hadn't seen him in a year and she really missed him.
So our kids are really open, especially when they're in elementary school. And so, we can find out things about them that help us and shape, and it builds trust, right? When kids share that kind of personal stuff with you and you're compassionate about it, it will build trust with them. There are 4 primary risk factors that our students deal with. They have emotional and social challenges, right? So when they come to school, and in Nada's session, she talked about how there's not a lot of oral exchange that goes on with our kids in their homes. And so lots of times you'll see a young woman pushing a stroller and she'll be talking on her cell phone and she has a 2-year-old in the stroller and she's not talking to that baby, she's talking on her cell phone. And when she gets home, she's talking to her friends or she's doing something else or she's cooking dinner or she's at work. And so students are often left to their own devices, even as preschoolers. And so they come to school with some emotional and social challenges because they don't necessarily have secure attachments with their parents and they don't know how to be social. They don't sometimes know how to play. They spend all of their time with adults. My nephew lived with us last year and he was 8 years old, but he had always been around adults. And so my son had to kind of teach him how to play games, how to play basketball, how to play football. And so that brings some challenges when kids come and they're expected to play at recess, but they don't come with those social skills. They haven't learned them as preschoolers. Students deal with acute and chronic stressors like moving several times a year, like dealing with having having electricity turned off or gas turned off in their homes. You come to school and you've been cold all night because you didn't have heat. And so those are kind of things that kids bring with them to school that we don't know about. So they have cognitive lags. We talk about language acquisition, word explosion. There are students who come to kindergarten knowing 5,000 words, and there are students who come to kindergarten knowing 50,000 words. And so you imagine those 2 students, and now they're in the same kindergarten class, and they have a whole big deficit in their vocabulary because they don't come from literate homes where there are books, and they haven't learned nursery rhymes, and nobody's sang those songs. E.D. Hirsch wrote that book about cultural literacy, and like lots of kids don't have that cultural literacy. I was telling Rich, I had an 11th grader who was taking the PSSA. She didn't know what an automobile was. And the prompt asked the students to write an essay about the evolution of an automobile. Well, she couldn't start the essay because she didn't know what an automobile was. And my heart was breaking because I couldn't tell her it was a PSSA, right? And so our students also deal with health and safety issues. The whole Flint, Michigan water thing talks about how kids don't have access to safe waters. Even in our own Pittsburgh Public Schools, they had to replace all of the water fountains because of lead. In the projects, there tends to be air quality issues, there tends to be water quality issues where our kids come to school with a whole different kind of like internal system, right? Because of the way that they've experienced nutrition. They eat a lot of cereal, they eat a lot of chips, they eat a lot of junk food, they don't get a lot of vegetables. And so those all put our students at risk when they come into the classroom for cognitive deficits. So next we're going to talk about how that affects kids emotionally. And I just want to take a risk and show you another clip from Inside Out. How many of you saw the movie Inside Out? So,
Hands up, everybody! It's showtime! Grab shelter!
Ready?
Ready! Oh boy, oh boy!
Problem, buddy? Do you?
Where is my super suit?
Rip that out right now!
You don't like me. So long, partner.
I'm joy. This is sadness. That's anger. This is disgust. And that's fear. Come on, group hug. You too, anger.
Don't touch me.
so you saw joy, sadness, disgust, anger, and fear in the Inside Out trailer. Also surprise. Surprise is innate. Kids can be surprised without any teaching. And so those are 6 emotions that we're born with. All of these emotions, humility, sympathy, forgiveness, patience, empathy, shame, optimism, cooperation, compassion, and gratitude, they're taught. And so when kids don't show compassion, it's because they haven't been taught compassion. It hasn't been modeled for them. When kids don't show forgiveness, it's because they haven't been taught forgiveness. And so these are things that through our interactions with students at Lit Support, we can begin to teach them these emotions and these skills. You teach compassion by showing compassion, right? I had a student last year at Allegheny, Cadence, and Cadence was always angry. And so whenever she would come out of the room, she would come out like, oh. And I'd say, what's the matter? And she'd say, so-and-so broke my pencil. And I'd say, well, why did she break your pencil? Well, she broke my pencil because I wouldn't give her any of my grapes. And so then we would talk about, well, why wouldn't you give her any of your grapes? You know, you should share, and that's cooperation. You know, or when you get angry, maybe you should try to forgive her for that. You know, can you tell her that you're sorry? One day as she was leaving the classroom, she smacked Miss Girl on her back. And so when we got out in the hall, I said, I want you to go back in there and apologize to that young lady. Well, why should I apologize? I said, you hurt her. Well, she made me mad. And I said, okay, but it's not okay to hit because you're angry. It's okay to be angry, but maybe you need to say to her, I'm angry with you because you wouldn't share your food with me, or I'm angry with you because you said my hair looked ugly today. And so we have to teach kids to have those conversations. We have to teach patience, right? A student gets frustrated. I had a first grader tell me last year, this is boring, I don't want to do this. It was a test, you're in first grade. Hey, how are you saying this is boring? That was so, because then think about that child in 6th grade. A child who experiences that feeling that this is boring and I don't want to do this in 1st grade. If we don't do something to teach him perseverance, right? If we don't teach him how to experience failure and still persist, then he will become disengaged. And those are the 6th graders who we see in classrooms with their heads down, right? Those are the kids who sleep in 9th grade classrooms because they don't have optimism, they don't have hope. And so we have to teach it. We have to say, this is hard, but you can learn, right? So those are the skills that we have to teach our kids. Now, stress has been shown to have a physiological effect on the brain. And so not only are these situations that our students coming from put them at a social and emotional disadvantage, it actually puts them at a physiological disadvantage. And so neurons are these little things in your brain that transmit information and through electrical and chemical symbols, right? And they are the core components. They're what make up our brain, and they're flexible. And so when a student is young, when they have chronic stress, when they're experiencing moving 5 and 6 times, when they experience a loss of a parent or a loss of a sibling or a chronically ill sibling, they have a weaker signal in their brain. Their brain actually processes information. It doesn't connect as well, and so you hear about synapses in your brains. Well, their synapses aren't flashing off as quickly as somebody who lives in a safe and stable environment. And so this can actually shrink neurons in the brain's frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that's responsible for our cognitive functioning. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? So my mom is like my toughest critic. She's like, yeah, that's a little complex. You gotta kind of bring that down. So that was her feedback to me for today. But I said, no, they screwed me. So cortisol is a stress hormone. So what's the last time when you guys like got your adrenaline really pumping? Somebody tell me.
Does exercise count?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. Exercise is great. You secrete cortisol when you exercise, and that's like eustress, right? And so you heard of eustress and de-stress. And so eustress is a good kind of stress, and your brain is secreting cortisol, and it's beneficial because when you exercise in the morning, then you have a more productive day, and because you get that blood flowing and stuff.
I have another thing. Our security alarm went off in the middle of the night, and I was scared.
Yeah, and your heart's beating,
Yeah, because
right?
the security company called and said it was glass breaking in a window in the back of the house. That was not good stress.
No, that's distress, right? And so our kids tend to experience distress. I had a student a couple years ago who lived up in the Ryan Street project. Her mom gave her away for $100 in food stamps, right? And so imagine being that little girl who is sent to live with a neighbor because her mom says, I can't take care of this child, but here's $100 in food stamps. Can you take care of her, right? And so when that kind of stuff happens to our kids, their brain is secreting that cortisol all the time, right? For probably like 3 days straight, right? Her brain is just secreting cortisol because she's stressed out. She's in a new environment. There's some crazy man living in the house. I called CYF. CYF said, oh, it's a family arrangement. It's okay. I was like, what? You can sell your child for $100 in food stamps. That's okay, right? But it's not okay. And so what happens is this little thing called the hippocampus and the amygdala is what secretes the cortisol. And so what happens is when that's constantly happening, the hippocampus, it atrophies. And there are parts of your brain that atrophy. And so a student, like when you're exercising and you have that, okay, I have my heart rate's up and I'm going, but then you stop and you calm down and you go through your day and everything kind of slows down. Or when your alarm goes off at night, then you calm down and you can go back to sleep after maybe an hour or so, right? But for kids who have experienced this and that part of their brain has atrophied, they're always in that fight or flight mode, right? And so what happens is a teacher comes in and says, hey Anita, I need you to get where you're going, right? And she just kind of comes and taps you on your back, right? And you go, get off of me, right? And people wonder, like, why are you, don't touch me. You know, you get that reaction from kids, and that's because they're constantly in that fight or flight mode because they have had chronic stress, all right? And so we have to help kids to learn strategies when they've lived in those kind of environments when they really feel stressed out over a period of time. So the good news is that our brains can change. So there's something called neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is the quality in our brains that allow them to continue to change throughout our lives. And so when our students experience positive experiences, positive one-on-one interactions with adults, positive interactions with other children, even video games, positive video games, you know, not Grand Theft Auto, but some fun video games, that helps them with attention. When my son was born, he had his left eye didn't move right with his right eye, right? And so the doctor said, have him play video games. And I was like, what? You know, but yeah, have him play video games. And it helped. You know, I had to patch his eye for a while, have him play video games, improved his vision. And so we've learned that our brain are designed to change. If you can help a child improve their vision by the time they're 13, he doesn't need glasses anymore because we were able to do things with him to kind of change his brain where his eyes could move together and he could see correctly, right? But that did take a supportive environment. And so learning to play music. Learning to play music is huge. And so that's why when Rachel talked about inviting kids to Urban Impact programs, to performing arts, and they start reading music and they start learning the dance sequences and ballet, and they start learning cooperation, and in Urban Impact we talk about the 4 respects and a loving atmosphere, and so their brain will change, right? You have heard, some of you may have heard Pastor Ed talk about a young man who they took into their home, and they took this young man into their home and they started him doing Bible quizzing, right? And he was a young man who his teachers and people, adults like caseworkers in his life, thought that he would never be able to graduate from high school, and he was just done, right? He was probably in 1st or 2nd grade, and they're like, oh, he's not going to amount to anything, too many deficits, too many environmental factors. But they took this young man home, they taught him to read, they started with Bible quizzing, and what they saw was that his cognitive ability began to increase because your brain can change. And so IQ is not fixed, it's variable, and so you can take a child who has an IQ of like 78, which is right on the borderline of intellectual disability, and you can give them rich experiences and one-on-one positive interactions and direct instruction, and then you can test them a couple years later, and they might have an IQ of like 90. Okay, so it's huge, and so we should never give up on our children because their brains can change, and healing can take place. And then when you put Jesus in, it's like they can be unstoppable because there is no limit. You know, it says all things are possible with God. And so we can change the trajectory of our students' lives. But how? So if we teach optimism, we teach them to have hope. If a student comes and says, I'm never going to learn to read, you know, you might have that kid who says, yeah, I'm never going to learn to read. This is too hard. You say, yes, you can learn to read. Look at what you've done in these last 3 weeks. You didn't know these words last week, but now you know them. You didn't know these words a month ago, but now you know them. And so help students to recognize their process, celebrate small victories with the students, and then they will learn to have patience. When we have patience with students, we teach patience. When we model those behaviors for students, then we teach them. And so, we teach the students to have optimism. We embody respect. You know, kids may be disrespectful to you in the beginning. They might do something that you're appalled at, but you don't say, oh, you're gonna go back to class, right, immediately. I'm not saying let a kid beat you up or be abusive, but if they don't give respect immediately, it's because in their communities, respect is earned. It's not something that is just given. And so I don't think we have to earn their respect, but we have to teach respect, and we have to model respect for them. And as we do that, they will gain trust with us, and they will learn to respect us, and they'll learn to respect others. Be inclusive, right? Find out what that child is good at. Help the child to set goals. You know, the research says that if a child has a long-term goal that they want to achieve, that is half the battle in helping them be successful. So if you have a second grader who says, I want to be a doctor, but they can't read, they can still be a doctor. And so you encourage them, say, yes, you're going to be a doctor. And so you find them some books, you know, that Doc McStuffins, you know, just find books that relate to what they're interested in, and find things to help them to foster that curiosity that they have. Because kids come to school wanting to learn. You think about a child when they're learning to walk, right? A kid walks around, they fall down, they get back up. And so a desire to learn and experience success it's innate. You know, kids are born with that. They persevere. We have a friend who has a baby in the hospital right now, and one thing, she's a little girl, and one of the things they say in the hospital is that girls are particularly feisty when it comes to illness. And so if you have a sick little baby girl, that little girl's going to try to fight to get better. And so even a baby has that to try to persevere and get better. And so so just find a way to tap into your strengths. If they know how to dance, then maybe you do a little dance when they get something right. Or, you know, for my son, I had to clap words with him, and he liked that because he likes rhythm and he likes to dance. And so, and then you just teach them social skills. And so when we get the kids and we say, good morning, how was your day? You know, did you ever get a little kid like, how's your day? Right, that's so sweet. And they will reflect what we give to them. So, do you guys have any questions? I talked really fast. Any questions at all? All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.